So there's a story in the Bible. Some of you may be familiar with this story. And I say it's a story because it's what Jesus calls a parable. And a parable was a story that Jesus told that wouldn't have been true. It wasn't something that actually happened, but it would have been told in a way that people understood. Would have taken current times and current situations and current issues and brought them into this story. So this story, which was illustrated in the song that we just heard, was a young man comes to his dad and he says, "Dad, I want my inheritance. I want my money." And essentially that's saying to his dad, "Dad, you're dead to me. Because you don't get your money until the parent passes away." So the dad says, "Okay, here's your inheritance." He gives it to him. The boy runs off and he squanders all this money, doing all kinds of crazy things. And the story tells you some of the things that he does, but it's all this different stuff that he goes and he throws away half of his dad's money. And he ends up eating with pigs. Right? This is the big abbreviated version of this story, all right? So he ends up eating with pigs. He doesn't think that's too good. He thinks, okay, it's better to be one of my dad's servants than to eat with pigs, so I'm going to go back home. And he's all terrified as he's coming home, especially the closer and the closer that he gets. But he sees in a distance his dad is there, and his dad's got his arms out, and he's welcoming him to come home. So the dad welcomes him home. He gets really, really excited, and he goes and tells everybody, "My son is home, let's throw a big party." Well, there's a character that you don't hear much about until this point in time. He's the older brother. And the older brother's like, "What the heck?" He left. He took half the money, and in fact, now if he comes home and we're throwing a party, he's eating into my money. He's taking my half. And Dad, how in the world are you going to throw him a party? And the dad says, "You have always been faithful to me." He says to the older brother, "You've always been loyal to me. But my son was lost and now he's found and he's home." And it's a really, really great story, and Jesus uses it, I think, to illustrate a couple of things. But there's a little problem with this story. And the problem isn't in what Luke, the writer, captures in this story. The problem is in what later people have done to the story. Because what they've done is they've put a little label over top of it that says the prodigal son. You may have heard of the story referred to as the prodigal son. Well, that's not Luke's label for the story. That's not even Jesus' label for the story. And the problem with that is, while the son is prodigal, I believe the father is prodigal and the older brother is prodigal as well. And that's the challenge, because what it does is it takes us to focus only on this younger son and how bad he is and how he runs away, and then how he receives grace on the other side. But I want to talk this morning about, I think Jesus had a couple of different messages going on in that parable that he told. So we're in this series now. It's just going to be a 2-week series, really brief, where we're talking about prodigal love, where we're going to talk about the nature of God and the nature of humanity and our love. Now, prodigal's probably not one of those words that you use a lot. Is that true? You probably don't go around saying, "I'm feeling very prodigal today," right? If you do, you're just trying to be a little highfalutin. Well, it's amazing how words can have multiple meanings and the importance of words in the English language. Merriam-Webster each year throws words out. Did you know that? Words that won't be used anymore. And the last words, some of the retirees that were thrown out were words like gallivant, britches, come on. Britches. If you got britches on this morning, that's still a real word. And the third one, floppy disk. Many of us can understand why that word is gone. But words in 2019, there were 40 new words added, but some of them were bioabsorbable, capable of being absorbed into living tissue, if you want to use that tomorrow. I don't know how. Salutogenesis, a medical approach that focuses on factors of human health rather than treating disease. And my favorite, garbage time. It refers to the period towards the end of a time sports competition that's become a blowout when the outcome of the game has already been decided, right? That's garbage time. It's the garbage time part for you coaches. You can yell garbage time, if things are going well for you. If they're not, maybe you're yelling it to the other team. But there are all these words. But prodigal is this word that's hung around. It's still used. And I think prodigal has a couple of meanings. It's strange and it's fascinating because it has a couple of meanings. I want you to turn to your neighbor and in 10 seconds or less say what you think the word prodigal means. Go. Okay. It's okay. We're not taking a quiz. We're not taking a test. Perhaps today, after this sermon, you'll be able to talk about what this word means and maybe even use it. Here's the challenge with the word. It means two things that are almost diametrically opposed to one another. One, it means extremely wasteful. extravagantly wasteful. So now you can see the younger son, right? Extravagantly wasteful. The other definition of this word means to give on a lavish or bountiful scale. So to be extravagantly generous. Extravagantly wasteful, extravagantly generous. So you say, how are all three people in that story? Why did I say the target is wrong? The title is wrong. Well, the son is prodigal, right? He's wasteful. He runs off. Is the father incredibly generous when he comes home? So the father's prodigal. And the older brother, who always gets a really bad rap, is incredibly generous and loyal to his father. He stays with him. He sticks with his father. He doesn't run off. When the other brother runs off, you don't even get a word about the fact that the younger brother runs off and takes half the inheritance until he comes back and wants a party. They're all prodigal. And I think the challenge with that story is that I believe Jesus is trying to talk more than just about what it's like to go off and be wasteful. I think Jesus is trying to talk about the prodigal love of a father, the prodigal love of a parent, the prodigal love of a son, the prodigal love of children, the prodigal love of people. So I want to illustrate this perhaps a little clearer this morning. I want to look at a story, an interaction that Jesus has with a woman in Scripture. It's a woman at the well. This might be another story that you've heard. She is a Samaritan woman. And I want to take a moment thinking about the definition of prodigal that means to give on a lavish or bountiful scale. And I want you to use that as the lens through which we look at this gospel according to John chapter 4 this morning. It says, now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John. Although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again." So the question of the day becomes, what definition of prodigal is Jesus being in this interaction with the woman? And I think a lot of that is about what perspective you're coming from. If you are a Jew in the first century, if you're hearing it as a Jew, first century Israel, the interaction is seen as wasteful and frankly shameful. Jews and Samaritans did not see eye to eye. Jews saw Samaritans as less than. They were not the people that Jews would interact with. We even get a note in parentheses in the scripture, this doesn't happen often, where it says, "For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." And yet, in this story, we learn that Jesus went through Samaria. You would guess that if Jesus was going to go through Samaria, he might run into, yes, a Samaritan. So Jesus chooses to go through Samaria. Now, to add to the scandalous nature of this interaction, what's the other problem with this person that Jesus is interacting with? She's a woman. Oh my. Right? This is scandalous that Jesus is interacting with this woman. Not just a woman, but a woman that's been married, yes, 5 times before and is not currently married. And yet Jesus stops. He pauses. He has this interaction with her. Now think about being a disciple of his at this time. I mean, this is a National Enquirer type story, right? There's no way that Jesus did this. How in the world? We're going to be cleaning up this for weeks. He interacts not only with a Samaritan, but a woman. I don't think it's hard to look at this text contextually and say, from a first century Jewish perspective, this is problematic. Jesus is wasteful. What is he doing? But I don't think that's the experience that Jesus is having. We learn time and time and time again in the scripture, if you watch Jesus through the Gospels, you see that he interacts with the people that the rest of the world doesn't seem to want to interact with. That he steps in the stuff often that makes people uncomfortable. And he does that by adding value to people that other people don't add value to. And I think we learn in our own lives from time and time again that we find people that are on the outskirts of society, people that we put on the outsides, that we're not supposed to interact with based on whatever the cultural dimension is in our current space and time. Jesus shares a bountiful and abundant love with this woman who by all accounts at the time is considered the lowest of the low. The one who others say he shouldn't have. And friends, what people might have seen in that moment as a wasteful act, Jesus saw as an incredible expression of love. Bountiful love, a lavish love, perhaps even a prodigal love. The tension, friends, between what prodigal means in our lives leads us to a fundamental question we have to ask ourselves. Are people worthy of love? Are people valuable enough to love? I mean, how often in our society and in our culture do we sense that there are groups of people that are not valuable enough to love? That are put on the outside, whoever they are, name it, that are put on the outside, or maybe they have done something that we have deemed and decided is unforgivable. So as a result, they go on the outside. We do this as communities. We do this as individuals. We do this as a nation. We don't like to talk about it. We like to pretend like it's not real. But it's real. That we put people on the outsides. And yet, Jesus teaches us that the prodigal love that we share with others, especially those who live at the margins or those who are different from us, leads to a closer and deeper connection with God. It's part of the story of how we get to know God and spend time with God is through people who are different from us. That's the push and that's the call that Jesus gives us. Jesus saw the inherent worth and the value of this woman who by all intents and purposes had little to no value to our community and society. And Jesus in turn asked us to close the gap between a phrase that's used often, us and them. You know what Jesus wants us to get rid of? Them. Jesus wants us to move more towards us. What's it like to consider all of us as us and not us versus them? And it starts with a little phrase that the woman says later in Scripture that if you're not paying attention, you could miss. It starts with seeing. She says to Jesus, I see that you are a prophet. I see. And in the gospel, according to John, we have to keep in mind that to see, it isn't just a verb like to see someone. It was actually connected to belief. I believe you have value. I believe you are X. I believe you are Y. I see you as, therefore, I believe you are. I see you as a person. I see you as a human. People who study this passage say the reason that she says that is because she believes that Jesus sees her. She sees because she is seen. She believes because she is believed in. She holds value because she is valued. It's a powerful, powerful thing to acknowledge people, to see them. Not so that we can tell them of their worth and value, but so that they can see their own. That's what Jesus does in this story. When Chuck was talking about mentoring, it's one of the things we do here at Restoration. I was thinking about my little buddy. I mentor a kid for the last 2 years named Dag Maui. And I was told in the very beginning when I got Dag Maui that he was a tough kid. Dag Maui is not a tough kid. He's a little kid that needed a little prodigal love. Y'all, we had our awkward moments in the beginning. Thank God for board games, right? We sit down, we play board games. Now here's the difference, a year into it made. When I walk into the cafeteria, I'm more excited to see him than I think he is to see me. The smile on that kid's face shows me that prodigal love when I walk in on Thursdays at 11 o'clock because I get to spend time with Dag Maui. We talk about each other's lives. We talk about our families. We talk about the fact that he plays soccer 23 out of 24 hours a day. But that prodigal love that's shared back and forth. Y'all, being a mentor takes 30 minutes a week. But it changes somebody's life because it shows them they are valued. And inherently they know that themselves. So mentor is one thing. Here's another quick example. We have friends that have a Christmas party every year. And they invite a ton of people, and they cook really, really well. It's a fun thing to go to. Susan and I love going to this party. When they have this party, it used to be that people would bring them host and hostess gifts, right? I mean, how many more poinsettias can you have at Christmas, right? More bottles of wine. So you think 100 people show up at your party, and all of them bring a bottle of wine or a poinsettia. And instead, they made a choice a few years ago to say, hey, instead of bringing wine or poinsettias, could everybody bring a gift card? And they bless this school and one other school every year with about $1,000 in gift cards each school. And what that does is it allows the principal, when a family comes in and says, hey, we can't go to the grocery store because we're out of money, or we're hungry, or our kid needs a coat, or they need shoes, it allows the principal to be able to say, hey, there's a church that cares about you in this community. And they're blessing you with this gift, so just go and do it. That is prodigal love. It seems so simple, right? It's just saying instead of bringing a bottle of wine or a poinsettia, bring a gift card. But friends, it's about shifting the way we think about the world. It's about shifting the way that we interact with people. Jesus calls us to love with a prodigal love. A love that is lavish, a love that doesn't make sense to everyone else around, a love that is bountiful, abundant. A love that brings us closer and closer to the margins and the people in it, and ultimately, I believe a love that will bring us closer to God. What if we went out into the world and tried to love prodigally? It might just maybe change the world. And maybe, just maybe, the news would have something else to report on.